Believe it or not, it was over 12 years ago that the then chief designer of the Volkswagen brand jump ship went to an unknown car company somewhere in Korea. But riddle me this, what was the first car he worked on? If you said it was a car, you'd be wrong. It was a crossover. Now that gets us to the point where things have changed. That designer, Peter Schreier, who's been an Inside the MOTOMAN Studio guest, he now doesn't run design anymore for Kia, Hyundai, and Genesis. He's kind of the godfather of the whole corporate group. So now other people are running design and have made this. Okay, so the obvious question, what exactly is this? It is a new flavor, a really new derivation of the Kia Sportage. This is now the 2023, and there are some significant changes that you and I need to cover. Let's start with the engine. And here, this may sound very familiar to you, a 2.5 normally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. Why should that sound familiar? Because it's the same engine that we have driven in many Hyundai Kia Group cars, most recently in the Hyundai Tucson, which this shares a platform with. So if we're looking at the Tucson in terms of output, that's 187 horsepower and 178 pound-feet of torque. The only thing Kia is telling us now is this is targeting 187 horsepower. Now, two other things we got to talk about. Future derivations as well as the transmission. This one is an 8-speed torque converter automatic. We've driven this combination in the Tucson out in Tucson, Arizona. And then there's going to be, this is what they've confirmed, a hybrid. I can't tell you anything about it, but again, if you were to look at my Hyundai Tucson hybrid episode, I'm willing to bet money that that is going to be the same propulsion system in this. And if you remember that episode, by the way, I got to just interject here, we're not shooting in my usual studio, which is an airplane hangar. We are shooting in an airplane hangar at a different airport in Southern California. This is Fullerton here, the FAA, that's kind of where they go. So when you get into trouble, you got to go to Fullerton. So usually it's not good to come to Fullerton, but this was a very good opportunity to come to Fullerton to play with new cars. And sadly, we are positioned right at the end of the runway and right next to the run-up area. So when people are going to take off, they have to rev their engine. You are not hearing this, you are hearing an airplane engine. Anyway, back to this whole hybrid thing. We learned in the Tucson episode that the more cohesive package was the hybrid, so I'm willing to bet this will be a hybrid. Will there be a turbo? I don't think so. I think this is going to be two propulsion systems. And then the other thing they're doing with this, remember in the Sorento that we drove recently? They do all these different flavors. They've got an X-Line, they've got an SX, there they have a turbo. Here they're going to take that same idea and have a version, like there's one over there that's not quite as fancy, then there's one here that's very fancy. And you're going to have different grades of vehicle. We'll also change the wheels. Like for example, they can be either 17s or 19s. And then the architecture of the vehicle, that brings up an incredibly good point. This is multi-link in the rear, and I'm pointing to the front, and I shouldn't be saying that. Multi-link in the rear. Now that's based on whether it's all-wheel drive or two-wheel drive, which will be two different versions of this. And then there is the typical strut system in the front. Nothing fancy, we're talking McPherson struts. Now we need to talk about really the business end of this thing, and that would be the inside. And so we come to the biggest change between that generation of Sportage and this generation of Sportage, the dimensions of the vehicle. This is now over 7 inches longer in length and over 3.5 inches longer in wheelbase. So that's the packaging of where you can put a lot of people and a lot of dogs, as you can see, or really evidenced by the way I'm sitting in this vehicle. Now granted, I'm reclined a bit here, but the reality is I can sit behind myself and I'm 6 foot tall. And while we're talking about sitting behind myself, something that I've noticed that's very interesting, you know how you see those like Opel Vauxhalls, like in Europe, you see the salesmen drive around Europe, or the people that drive like Ford Fusions here, and they're traveling salesmen, at least in the before times, and they had that hanger that's attached to the back of the seat. Well, the designers at Kia, they've changed the packaging here, and they've molded in that hanger into the headrest here. That is an incredibly neat touch because I'm a bit of a freak with like my suit coats. Believe it or not, I do wear suits. And I don't really want to hang it on here, but that little thing that's inside the coat, I'd rather kind of spread it out here. Thank you very much for that. Then, while we're talking about the interior, this is a mishmash of old Hyundai Kia Genesis Group and new Hyundai Kia Genesis Group. Like all of the tactile feels, kind of what you'd expect from Hyundais and Kias over the past couple of years. It's a couple of rungs better in like some of the details here, but then this one is a higher line version. Then there's the dashboard, the design specifically. They're doing a bit of a paradigm shift here. If you remember in Kias over the past couple of years, they've separated out the infotainment screen from the IP screen. Here, they're kind of taking a page from the folks at Mercedes-Benz, where it's one screen, one flowing screen from side to side. This almost looks like a current-gen Mercedes, at least in screens. It's 12.3 in front of the driver and 12.3 infotainment. Now, there's good news and there's bad news here. The good news is there are some hard buttons and some knobs, which you and I talk about a lot. However, there's also haptic feedback, like all of the application buttons where you can go between the map, the main menu, the seek for the radio, that kind of stuff. That's haptic feedback. Don't really like that part of the interior. Everything else in terms of design on the inside of the vehicle, very cohesive, and they've kind of brought it in together where they have the lines from the exterior repeated in the lines in the interior. And speaking of the exterior, stepping outside, you can see some of the dimensions we talked about in the overall design of the vehicle. The presence of this is significantly different than a Kia Sportage that came before it. Specifically, you can see between the wheelbase, you look at the size, the length, that's accentuated. That's what's picked up in the interior. You look at the dashboard, specifically over onto the passenger side, there's a lot of horizontal lines. That's the kind of thing you see here with the separating the daylight opening out from the rest of the body of the vehicle. Then there's a lot of geometric shapes. You see some of these details here as well as in the front. They repeat that inside the vehicle within the vents. Then look at this in terms of the wheels. This is more of the off-road, that X-Trail flavor that they do in the Sorento. They're going to do it here. So these wheels look a bit different. Notice they're a bit smaller, but one can opt for larger wheels to make it look a bit fancier. Then looking towards the rear, this is the most cohesive part in terms of where Kia is trying to go. I don't know about you guys, but I've been spending a lot of time online looking up the Kia EV6. Now, for all two of you that don't know what the coming EV6 is, that is a fully electric vehicle that Kia is coming out with. It doesn't look like a crossover, but proportions, it's going to be a crossover. It rides on the same platform as the Hyundai Ioniq 5 that you and I have already looked at. Now, me personally, I like the design of the Ioniq 5 better. Will reserve final judgment until I see that car, the EV6, in person. But why do I bring this up? Well, this back end, exactly like the EV6. So if I'm bringing all this together, aside from the change in dimensions and some of the cute packaging they did on the inside, the big step forward here is bringing together a change in Kia corporate design. And that's a big deal, not just because crossovers are what people buy nowadays, even though I don't agree. It's because it's a changing of the guards. Peter Schreier, I highly suggest you check out that Inside the MOTOMAN Studio episode. He was at A Known Quantity, a German car manufacturer that is probably one of the largest car manufacturers back then, and he made a switch to a company that no one had heard of and made a car that no one really bought only because maybe they could get their financing or it was cheap. Now, Kia's in a very different position, and it's because of Peter Schreier. And this is one of the big steps where they're saying, okay, thank you, Mr. Schreier, but now we're gonna build on the excellent legacy you put into our car company. And this is the point of the episode where I would normally give you guys a wish list, but we haven't driven it. I haven't spent a lot of time here. They gave me like 3 seconds with the car. So I'm gonna put a pin in the wish list. We'll put that into the episode when we actually drive the vehicle. And this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all word, MotoManTV all word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I once again humbly request your help with the algorithm. What does that mean? Yes, subscribe, notifications, and click like, which actually is really important, but also sharing all of these episodes with your friends on all of your socials. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später. Now, I'm gonna see if I can do a couple laps around the patch in that plane.